Good afternoon from New York City to all our viewers in North America, Europe, Romania, and anywhere in the world. And welcome at a new edition of the Leon Feraru Conferences Online, one of our permanent series centered upon subjects and themes relevant in a transatlantic context. Echoing Black History Month, we are focusing today on another racial minority that has suffered historic injustice, social marginalization, slavery, and even was the tragic subject of the Holocaust during the Second World War. That is on Roma people of Central and Eastern Europe. I have the pleasure to welcome to the program one of the leading experts in all things related to Roma people, past, present, and future, Cristiana Grigore, who is the founder and director of Roma People's Project at Columbia University, and research scholar with this prestigious university. Cristiana graduated psychology at the University of Bucharest, has an MA in international education, policy and management at Vanderbilt University, has co-founded the organization Link Education and Practice, founded Roma People's Project at Columbia University. Her work has featured in very prestigious and well-known outlets like New York Times, CNN, NPR, Voice of America, Jazeera America, and many others. Cristiana, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and hello everybody. Thank you for watching us, and I look forward to this conversation we're going to have today. It's a real pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you in our program, and we think our topic is very relevant, not only because we are now celebrating Black History Month, but also because it's a very urgent, timely topic for many, many other reasons. I would start by asking you, how does an Eastern European Roma girl become a research scholar of one of the most prestigious universities in the world?
Oh wow, that's a very interesting question, and it's a core question for a memoir I'm writing. So I'm going to present some highlights of my journey from a small town in Romania, Slatina, to being in New York and conducting my research and leading the Roma People's Project. In some ways, it might look like the perfect Cinderella story, girl from very modest origins, right? No, my mom being a cleaning lady and my father a welder, none of them having the opportunity to do the things I do right now, and but there are lots of nuances to it and lots of support I received, and I'm gonna mention a few things that I think were relevant for our topic today. One of them is, it took me many years, actually, when I was at Vanderbilt, to appreciate and see the richness and the value in my background and my family and what I received from them. I actually got a strong foundation from my family, not in terms of status and power and money, but in terms of values and freedoms the freedom to read, to think, to write. I was spending hours of my time reading stories and imagining the kind of life I would like to have.
What
And
was
that
your
was
family? A typical Roma family in Romania? Was it the typical family, or was it different from the rest of the community?
That's a great question. It is typical in many ways. It's actually, there are so many Roma families that are like my family, but they're not typical in the way the Roma are portrayed. So my family, was a modest family, working, being, trying to get the best for their children.
How
Quite
integrated were they?
assimilated.
How integrated were they in the Romanian society?
They were quite assimilated in the Romanian society. I can speak of the dynamics at the countryside. Like the way I felt when I was a kid was that we were tolerated, like we're not like actively discriminated, but there was always this like low status feel and vibe about us, that no matter what we do and no matter how much we try, we cannot be like a proper Romanian. And the mission of my family was to work really, really hard and make sure that we are seen as respected citizens. I remember my grandfather, who was a blacksmith, he was always complaining about there are too many holidays in the Orthodox calendar, because he wanted to show so hard that we work hard, we have the same values, we have the same lifestyles. So that was an important mission of my family. But there was also this shame and like burden of not being good enough. We're never in a sense of shame and internalized stigma. I've seen my parents feel. And so it took me many years to see how much I received from my family. And I'm sure that so many other children from so many other Roma families receive. But it took me years to frame it as such and to understand the power and strength of
you didn't know at the time what was wrong. You didn't know at the time what was wrong, but you felt something wasn't quite right.
I mean, I knew we were Roma, but I tried very, very hard to forget and to not think about it, not mention it in any environment at school. Like I was also fortunate that my mom's skin was lighter than my dad's skin. So that allowed me to pass. That allowed me to act like I am not Roma, which now looking back, it's so much effort in creating this segregation, only to be accepted, only to have the same chances of every other child. So it was the sacrifices of my family, for sure, that gave me the chance to have a better life. And many people who helped along the way, many people who believed in my work, organizations, fellowships, and also Colombia seeing the potential in this topic. I remember when the project was approved by somebody in the higher administration, I remember being quite anxious, not knowing if what's gonna happen. It was in their power, right, to decide. And there was this lady who looked at me and said, there are a lot of people who come in this door and talk with me about their ideas, but I can see that you care about the idea itself and don't have any other agenda, and that's rare. She also said that we need to learn more from the stories of people from Eastern Europe. At that time, there were quite a lot of protests for maintaining democratic values in Romania. And they were inspired by that, and they were thinking we need more of that. So I remember feeling seen at the time, and really being thankful for this opportunity this university is creating for me, but I also want to say, because it looks all maybe very good and beautiful and glamorous, and in so many ways it is. But it's also a lot of struggle. It's a lot of struggle to make a space for a topic that has been so neglected, so little on the agenda of mainstream cultural and academic institutions. I feel like I'm constantly on the edge, which in times builds resilience. But sometimes I wish it's easier to create a space like that. So that's why I welcome such conversation and spaces to connect and talk.
Look, Cristiana, I mean, I know you well, and some people may not know you, that you are such a brilliant storyteller. So so I would like to dwell a little bit more on your life as a kid in Romania, about your background, because I know that so much of your research work is nourished by your early experiences, by your what you know as growing as a Roma girl and a Roma young woman later in Romania, and all your experiences, even here in the United States. So how important was education for your parents, and how much did they believe in social mobility based on educational achievement?
Thank you for asking me that. Incredibly important. I remember when I was in high school preparing to study, to go to college in Bucharest, and I get emotional when I think about this, because it's a very powerful part of my story, and it's all because of my mom's and my dad's vision. More than a year where they spent over 70-80% of their income on my private tuition. Going to Bucharest, I was one of the only high school students who was going to Bucharest every other weekend to prepare with university professors, leaving at midnight, arriving in Bucharest just a little bit before 6, doing meditations, basically private classes, so to prepare. It's kind of the equivalent of other programs in US, for the whole day, and return at the end of the day or stay overnight to a friend, and then come back to my
pass
small
the
town.
entrance exams, right? Just to make sure,
right, exactly.
people who are not familiar with our system, it's like
exactly right.
Like private tutoring in order to pass the entrance exam at the university, right?
Yes, to have the best chances to do that. And throughout my childhood, like my family, and that's the case of many Roma families, going to school was not even like a question of going. Of course you go to school, like everyone goes to school. And I think many Roma families who might have obstacles or barriers in that case is because maybe they don't have the schools very close, maybe the kids are bullied at school. I mean, there is a whole other conversation there, but so many Roma families, the vast majority of Roma families in Romania send their kids to school and want the best for their kids. And that was definitely the case of my family. And I remember my father throughout my childhood, he always said to spend time surrounded by people who are smarter, who know more, so I can learn, so I can develop. And they always make sure I have access to books. They always make sure that, and to create space for it. Like they were working so hard in so many hours, but they never required anything from me other than study and be healthy and be happy. And so I owe a lot of the life I live right now and the work I do right now in that incredible vision my family had, and sacrifice to make sure I have the best education.
Tell us a little bit about your experience in passing the ocean. So you graduated psychology in Bucharest. Why psychology first?
I remember reading Russian literature for hours, hundreds of pages. I remember, oh, I missed that time. My son is half Russian. His father is Russian, and it's kind of beautiful
You
to
see,
think about.
it all starts with a good book, right?
It all starts with a good book, yes, and an appreciation for good literature. So, and his name is Lev, which is like Lev Tolstoy. So it's
Right.
yeah. So I remember reading
He's a cute
Russian
guy. I mean, he
literature.
was a little bit earlier in the around
I
while we
know.
were preparing for the show. I hope he shows up again by the end of this program.
Maybe I will invite him right at the end. He's starting to speak, and he's
You are
delightful.
quite a busy mom. I know that.
I
So
know, yes, but I'm happy to make time for this very important conversation. Um, so I remember reading Russian literature, but also other books. I mean, I read a lot as a kid, and I feeling like I understand something about human nature that I wanted to know more. So it was in. I remember one of the portrayals I was reading in one of the books, and I was like, I want to understand more of how the mind works and how humans function, how collective, groups function. But I think also there was my need to understand myself and start to make sense of my story and to um uh I was so closeted and hiding my Roma identity so much, almost to the extent of even from myself. There was a big burden and shadow over my voice, my potential. Even like I could not share with my friends. I could not share with anybody other than my family who I really was, and I could not invite people, classmates home for birthdays. I mean, now when I think about it, it's like tragic that a child has to go through all of this to just feel normal and have access to normal, just the
normal life.
feeling of a normal
Yeah,
life,
yeah.
exactly. So I think that was a need of mine to, and it the studying psychology in college, it took me almost the whole experience of 4 years to end up speaking and well, first of all, to get familiarized with, like, for example, therapy, counseling, which are still, unfortunately, still maybe things have changed right now, but at the time they were still seen as like taboo, and like, what, you have a problem, why would you do that? I think everyone should seek the support of a therapist, whether they have a big story they keep secret, as it was my case, or not. But so basically, I came to US for the first time when I was 22 in 2006. It was the third year of college. It was only for a summer, but that summer, um, again, this is a long story, and it's the subject of my book. Um, but that summer, at the end of that summer, which was absolutely extraordinary, I talked for the first time in the United States about my Roma identity, and I was forced by circumstances to do that. It was not like I wanted to do that, but the kind of the story and what you deny with so much strength and power, it ends up catching up with you sooner or later. And so it was definitely my case. So in the last year of college, when I went back to Romania, I remember opening the computer and trying to look more information about the Roma people, and I remember feeling like there is such a big gap, such a big distance between who I was at the time and the Roma people. But it was because studying psychology and having access to therapy and amazing therapists who have helped me along the way, that I managed to deal with this big stigma and this story I had kept secret for so long. I remember when I talked for the first time, it was in therapy in Romania, and I remember sobbing. And it was really the process from sobbing, crying, sharing with each and every of my friends. Nobody knew, nobody. Maybe some had a clue, they maybe thought, but they didn't mention it to me because I think they also wanted to protect me and did not want to expose me. So I went from that. So in a matter of 3 years, I went from completely hiding my Roma identity to being on the pages of the New York Times, because it took me 3 years to return to US. And during my time at Vanderbilt, and the excellent education I got there, when I learned more about race relationships in the US, philanthropy, affirmative actions, and just basically a sense of educational policies overall in the world we live in, I started to understand my own story, frame it into the bigger context, and started to write about it. And I was very fortunate that one of the first articles I wrote, and I remember editing it many, many times because that's how I function. Like I try to do things as best as I can, and I love writing and editing. It was published by the New York Times. And I think that opened a lot of new possibilities for me. And then there was another article. And so that was the beginning basically of going from a personal search and a personal, I don't want to underestimate the struggle and the deep suffering, but also the opportunities I had, like the right environment, scholarships, the education, both in US and in Romania, and supportive community to make this more about my story. I started to understand the bigger picture. I started to understand how many Roma are struggling, how many Roma are invisible, that my story is not actually unique. What was maybe different about my story is the context that facilitated giving me a voice and basically a framework and a space in the American academia to make sense of the bigger story here, because the bigger story, and it was a process of discovery, step by step, connecting with other Roma and starting to understand the beauty and the richness of a culture that is not much known about, that we're a global people, that we have a history that we can be proud of, all so many moments of resilience and surviving so many atrocities. So this is some of the adventures and
I think
process
it's
of learning.
important that's to mention this this journey from finding yourself in great authors and then studying psychology, helping you understand something that was going inside of you and something that was happening with you. And also while in the United States, learning to frame your case in a much bigger picture. It's very interesting journey, and I'm sure your book will be an excellent book, because I'm familiar with your writing, and I think you have so many great stories to share, and I hope they will be inspirational for people in your community to follow the same path of achievement. But some of our viewers are quite are not quite sure whether to use Roma or Gypsy. What is wrong with Gypsy? Why do you call yourselves Roma and not using the Gypsy name that has been in circulation for so much time?
Absolutely. It's a valid question, and I'm happy to share my perspective on this.
Now I'm starting with the difficult questions.
Yes, absolutely.
Enough with autobiography. Let's start on the sensitive themes.
Yeah, you got me all like now. I'm actually quite. It's wonderful to think about, just to have this perspective, like looking back and.
I know that for you there are very
beautiful, wonderful introduction.
For you it's very clear, but I'm sure that for some of our viewers, they are not sure what is wrong with the Gypsy or other names.
Well, you see, Dorian, the identity and agency starts with names and titles, and it looks like a trivial thing, like a word. It's just a word. Many things people say, it's just a word. It's the same thing. What's the problem?
Yeah.
It will avoid so many confusions. Roma, Romanians, Rome,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
you're familiar with that, I'm sure. But as I said, Roma is not a new word. It's how Roma people have called themselves forever. I remember even my grandparents lost a lot of their language, but sometimes they spoke in Romani between themselves.
Mm.
And I remember using the word Roma and Romanes, and I have this like special connection thinking about my grandparents and them using Romnie, Roma, Romanes when I was a kid. Gypsy was always a misnomer, always. Europeans thought we came from Egypt. The word gypsy, the word itself has many pejorative connotations, from being the untouchable, or being associated with many negative traits, like being a criminal, being a thief, dirty. Even in some dictionaries, that's one of the explanations of like the definition of the word. Or the opposite, especially in US, but not only exotic connotations. So when you say gypsy, you either imagine like the baggage that comes with it is incredible, and it's a very powerful word. It triggers a lot of emotions in a lot of people, but it's very disempowering for Roma people, and it's dehumanizing, either in exoticizing the culture or criminalizing the culture. Mm-hmm. So if I think about myself as I'm a gypsy at Columbia University, I immediately comes in my like the associations I have in mind is like not being taken seriously, being disregarded. You know, it's when I think about I'm a Roma scholar at Columbia University, it comes with a certain dignity and seriousness, and also the capacity to tell my own story the way I want it. For me, the fact that a people say, this is our name, this is how we want to call ourselves, and the insistence on the other side of like, no, actually, we got used to this, that's the way we want to call you. It's staggering. I just cannot understand. It's like you saying to me, my name is Dorian, and I will say, no, actually, I want to call you like this because it's a nickname I associate with you. Now, there are some...
You call me with a different name, but you don't do it.
I would not do that because it's a matter of respect.
No,
sorry to call on you. I don't want to call on you. It's just like...
I think it's important to stress this is the name that you as a people call or have been called yourself for a long time. But Roma people is living in many countries in Central and Eastern Europe. There are Roma communities, and significant ones, in Romania, in Hungary, in Serbia, in Ukraine, in Russia, all over the Balkans. Do they share the same language, the same customs, the same unifying culture, or are they different because they live in different countries?
We are so incredibly diverse. And doing the work I do at Columbia for quite a few years now, I've been fortunate to meet Roma from different parts of the world, from Slovenia to Spain to Russia to, many from Romania, of course, as well. We don't have, so there is a Romani language, but not everyone is speaking the Romani language. And I think many times it's because of forced assimilation policies and the impact that had on Roma people. But there are groups that speak Roma, Romani language and some dialects. Then we practice a diversity of religions. I feel like Roma people as a people are as diverse as New York City itself, or there are so many, and it's incredible. It's incredible for me to discover this, to get to see that although there's so many differences, we also have something in common. You would recognize a New Yorker where you see a New Yorker, and I feel like it's the same with a Roma person. You know, there are Roma who live more traditional lives. There are Roma who are more assimilated. There are Roma who are gay. There are Roma who are feminist. So there's so much diversity there. And I think that's actually a wonderful asset for our culture, that we have this. And I think it's a time for us to know each other and discover who we are. What I've discovered the Roma people have in common, I haven't met one Roma person so far that doesn't have a sense of an internalized stigma of a form or another, and not fighting that throughout their lives and coming to terms with it one way or another. So as diverse and as living in different cultures, speaking different languages we are, almost all actually the Roma individuals I've met, they have a story of either discrimination or shame or family secrecy, where they didn't want to share about their who they are for fear of being discriminated against. And I think that needs to be changed. And I think that needs to be talked about, addressed, and replace that sense of a stigma and universal experiences of discrimination or struggle with new stories, uplifting stories, where we can actually define who we are, talking about definition and agency. And actually at this point, to not define ourselves by saying, oh, we are not this and this and this, but also to think, who are we? Who are we right now? And how amazing it is that we are part of this global community. But I hope that answers your question.
We will we will expand on that. Don't worry. As a Roma woman, what do you think are or what do you feel are the features of the Roma culture that you find most exciting and helpful? And what are the features, if there are any, that you don't like that much, or you would like to forget about?
I think for me, and this is my experience, right? Because I think there are many other Roma who would find something else in it, is this fact that I think is so relevant for the 21st century, which is that we're multicultural by definition, that no matter in what country we live, we have yet another culture we belong to. And there is beauty and there is meaning in this, in a world that we travel more, we interact more. I mean, I had this story way before I moved to US, which is a country of people who are multicultural, right? And why is this important? It's important because it gives me ultimately the freedom to define who I want to be, the life I want to have, to not be stuck in a particular narrative of, oh, I'm only this nationality, or I'm only this. It just gives me perspective to have this story of multiculturalism in my Roma ethnicity. And it's a story that is not yet much told because we're so busy and there's so much to be done. When it look at most of the Roma people deal with very basic struggles like lack of opportunities to jobs or other services and so on. So I acknowledge that it's a luxury and a great privilege to actually look at my Roma identity and the Roma people and the Roma culture through this lens. So that's one aspect. Then other aspect is get a lot of meaning from the fact that we're people that survived so much that happened to us. We are a resilient people. We're people who adapted. We're people who never really start wars or have an army or like have like brutalized other cultures in this particular way. We don't have that story, and I like that. So there is a lot of potential and creativity in resilience. Honestly, for me personally, the pandemic and everything that happens, it doesn't have much on me because I am used to struggle. I'm used to things that, but I do want to make a parenthesis that for the most vulnerable Roma communities, the pandemic is an absolute disaster because it makes things much more difficult and hard for them. So the story of strength and resilience.
Categories, right?
Yeah.
Been,
because they cannot socially distance. It's so much, and I really hope that. Yeah, it's.
What about the
whole
next
discussion?
are there
so the objection? Yeah. So that's another. So it's hard to object something because when you understand why it's there, it's hard to object. But I can say what I don't resonate with.
Okay.
What I don't resonate with, I feel like there is another side to the fact that we're so different and we got to start to know one another right now more, and we come with such different experiences. Like you can be, you can literally have like opposite experiences as a Roma. There is not like a unifying story about what it means to be Roma, either in Romania or even in like the same neighborhood or region. So it's an incredible diversity of that. Is this, and it's not only common to Roma, it's common to other cultures as well. Is this kind of the politics of who is Roma and who is not Roma? Are you Roma enough or you're not Roma enough? So I think there is. So it's like if you're not Roma in a particular way, there are sides that say, oh, that's so basically these dynamics of delegitimizing somebody or trying to because they're not Roma like you. And I think right now, because we started more and more Roma are coming out, and I hope more and more will do that as a Roma and share their experiences. It's struggling for some people. So for example, some people resonate more with the history of discrimination and a certain kind of struggle. Some other people, like the invisible Roma, have other issues like internalized stigma, secrecy. So we need to make space for everyone to share their stories. And of course, and again, it's the case with Roma and other culture, anything that is affecting the human rights of anybody, whether they're women or children, I'm absolutely not agreeing with any of that. But that's the case if it happens in the Roma culture or in any other cultures, if there are any, yeah.
How do you reconcile your feminist beliefs with some aspects of the Roma culture that may be, in some interpretation, may be considered perhaps a bit misogynistic?
Yeah, sometimes like that, or conservative in some ways. Yeah, that's
I've told you.
Think about it. So the misogyny. Let's address this. The misogynism. And I promise I will get to the Roma culture on it. But if you look at mainstream cultures, misogynism prevails in so many cultures that are not minority cultures. They're not minority groups.
On this show.
Like, look at the Me Too movement. Look at how many misogynistic men are in positions of power who abuse their power for having access to things that are toxic, unhealthy for women. And making a parenthesis, I think there is more and more attention on this, and I think there is more and more the toxic masculinity needs to be addressed overall. And I'm very proud to see and always uplifted, always happy to see stories of men who don't deal with it, who are not like that. But I mean, so I just want to say that misogynism is a big issue. Unfortunately, it's way too general, and it affects minority cultures, affects mainstream cultures, and it's a topic I am personally committed to address more in the future, in the intersectionality with the Roma culture, and also separate, because I think everyone's life will be better if we address it. And I also have a son who I want to make sure he grows up in a culture where there are, narratives about what it's like to be a man that are different in many ways than it's what is right now, and have good role models in that regard. When it comes to the Roma people, okay, and I had my own shares of disagreements, or even personal, stories of feeling like I'm not seen as a Roma leader because I'm not a man and I don't do things in a certain way. But I try to understand where it's coming from. I remember meeting a family upstate New York, just like a couple of years ago. They were immigrating to US, and I was actually invited by a social worker in that community to meet with them and discuss and see why they don't want to send their children to school. There was a particular girl who was a preteen, and they wanted her to go to school, and the family was objecting that. And they invited me to understand and to basically be some kind of a mediator culturally to understand what is happening and what's the story there. So I remember meeting with them, and I remember telling these men, we're sitting at a table and talking. I said, don't you want your daughter to be a lawyer, a doctor, be doing more with her life? And I remember his eyes started to get glittery and happy, and said, of course I would love that. And I was like, okay, that sounds like opposite of your behavior. And he said, but I am afraid that if I take my daughter to school, she will be harassed by non-Roma boys, that she will be bullied. So I was like, okay, so there is another set of things there that has to do with safety, also maybe some beliefs he had around how women should be and conduct themselves, which is a whole separate issue. And I'm like, okay, so maybe for this particular family, homeschooling might be a better idea. So many Roma men, especially in traditional families, they're more conservative because they want to, I think it served the purpose throughout the history, which is to preserve the culture. But I am all for addressing it, understanding the story. Like, for example, this story that I just mentioned right now, it would have been framed as this man doesn't appreciate education, doesn't want to send their kids to school, and so on. And that was not the problem. It was another problem there. It was another issue there. So have real data, real information of what is actually happening there, why they maybe maintain some practices
or acts.
Right. And I'm also all for empowering the women and the girls so they can make choices for themselves. And I remember at some point, actually I had like a collaboration with CNN many years ago, and I was in this more traditional Roma community, and I remember the leader of that community looked at me and was like, "You're wearing pants, and you should wear a dress." And he sent me to his, and it took me years to actually understand how much it didn't sit well with me. When I went home, I actually changed in short pants because I felt like it represents me and who I am with my own story. I would have interpreted things differently if the woman in that community would have come to me and share, ask me to do things, to wear a dress or not. If we give more access and resources to women to make and there are actually quite a few feminist organizations in Romania who are already doing that. I think women will have more choices to make and more of an equal ground to negotiate these internal dynamics that sometimes are not so yeah.
Well, it's a lot.
It's a lot to be addressed. Yeah.
Well, how does the Roma experience relate to the African American experience in the U.S.?
Yeah.
Because both were subject to
Exactly.
racial discrimination, slavery. How do you see this relationship?
So we certainly have a lot in common. Some differences too, and a lot we can, learn from each other. Obviously, I think the biggest thing is the slavery, right? And how is that impacting collectively a people? When it comes to the Roma slavery, there is more to be done, to be acknowledged, to be understood, also to be understood the long-term consequences on the Roma identity and the Roma current challenges and struggles. And I'm glad to see there is more effort in that regard. The Roma men and Roma Black, so the Roma men and the African American men, they were both basically subjected to more brutality than the mainstream white people, and you see more and more that being reported and exposed in the United States, and how the mainstream, it's still a lot to be done, absolutely. I mean, there's some unbelievable cases of injustice, like police brutality, scapegoating, and so on and so forth. There is a lot of that happening in the Roma case as well, but is not yet reported. It's very under the radar. In a matter of fact, there were a case at some point where a Roma man was killed at the same time with with an African American man in the United States. And one case got a lot of attention, media attention, and the other case was not even mentioned much. So that's another issue where there is a lot of similarities and a lot of things to be addressed. There is more scapegoating of the cultures. Like if something goes wrong in a community, is either a Roma or an African American, or and in the case of women, it's a mixed story of both brutality, but it's kind of dressed in exoticism as well. So the Roma women and the Black women have been seen as exotic. I mean, also during slavery, they were objectified and sexualized, and some horrifying cases, there are cases of rape and not being treated as fully human, like they could be taken away from their families and children by the landlords. That they were some like trophies of some sort. So there is a history there of exoticizing the bodies, either criminalizing or exoticizing the bodies of Black people and the Roma people. And it's not only the African American communities, there are all the other stigmatized groups that the Roma have a lot in common in the US. And part of my work at Columbia is to address this and to build kinships and understand this bigger story so we can cooperate and gain more strength together. I think one big difference is that the African American culture and people have a very strong middle class, and with more and more African American people thriving, with very established poets, as we saw the presidential with inauguration, and writers and artists. Whereas with the Roma people, it's not like we don't have it, but it is invisible to the public discourse because either Roma are hiding their identity, or that part of the narrative has been just erased. Like there are actually quite a few Roma artists that contributed greatly to, for example, the Romanian culture or other cultures, but they're not looked at through their Roma identity lens.
Mhm.
So I think there is a lot to be done here to acknowledge, which is, I think, in the case of African American people, there is more of that, and we can have more of that too. And on a more positive note, I think there is a lot of common strengths and a sense of like overcoming a lot that you can see in the spirit of a Black person and a Roma person. And I see a lot of space for more research and understanding of this field, and collaborative and understanding the experiences of multiple groups and what is in common about that. So I hope I somehow answer your questions on this.
How have you incorporated these ideas in the Roma People's Program? Tell us a little bit about your work through this program. What's all about? What are you doing in order to advance a Roma agenda in the academic circles and beyond?
I think so. One important thing we do is to create a space itself, because maybe in some other cases that is taken for granted, like there are multiple institutions, centers, but in the case of Roma, creating the space itself in a mainstream academic space takes a lot of time and energy.
Is this the only,
and it's a goal in itself.
Program in the United States? Is this the only program?
Is one of the very few. They're very it's definitely the only one at Columbia University and in New York, and it's pioneering work to do to create a space in a mainstream institution on Roma issues. Now, in addition to that extraordinary effort it takes to have that space, what we want to focus on is spotlighting empowering stories from Roma who are very
successful in life, right?
Because there are a lot of them, but these stories are not centralized. These stories are not told, and there are quite a few in New York, quite a few in the West.
You're talking about the lack
globally,
the lack of knowledge about the middle class.
Exactly.
Roma people or other success stories that are not known, so you want to share them widely.
So we interview Roma whose stories we think are worth sharing. We basically support different mainstream cultural institutions and human rights institutions understand the Roma story. We actually have quite a few collaborations this year in this regard, and I see more and more of a momentum and interest in that, which is extraordinary and timely. We want to be inclusive of different kind of Roma and not say, oh, you're Roma in a certain way or the other way. So we're creating a space that is inclusive. We're also creating a space of connection between Roma and non-Roma, because we know that many times what is behind prejudice or ignorance is lack of connection, lack of knowing a Roma person. Like in many cases, what the stories I get in US is, I've never met a Roma person. You know, all the knowledge and information, if there is any, because in some cases people don't know much about us to begin with, are based on media representations that are very simplistic. So we create that space. We also want to focus on facilitating information, basically like kind of translating. I think for me, being in between cultures, it helps me to understand, for example, we had some cases of say non-Roma who love to call themselves gypsies without knowing anything about the Roma people. But with the right information and education and knowledge, they actually became supporters of the Roma cause, and then decided that it's not a good idea to use the word gypsy to define themselves or to do their work. We also, respond to all sorts of calls for advising or representing. We had quite a few of this in New York, but mainly, basically, we want to change the presentation of what it means to be Roma. We want to contribute to empowering representations, uplifting stories, and to create more visibility about the Roma in the mainstream society.
But in the United States, the situation is different, right? Because you don't have many Roma people here as you have in Europe. Why is this program taking place in the United States and not in Europe, where probably is most urgent and relevant?
Well, you would be surprised. There are actually quite a few communities of Roma in the United States. Of course, not as much as in Europe, but New York is in particular a hub for Roma people, Roma cultures. There are quite a few neighborhoods here that are Roma, but beyond that, the mission of the Roma People's Project is to contribute to understanding a global Roma identity.
And I should say primarily an academic institution rather than
right.
Advocacy organization or
exactly, or a grassroots level. That's a different kind of services, and like helping or supporting, a particular community or right
information about
right.
Roma people.
And we think that's very important because there is not much of that. There's not even it's not yet an understanding of, there's an understanding of that when it comes to, for example, the Jewish culture or other cultures, but when it comes to, and also it's a very interesting topic for scholarship in itself in the academia. For example, we don't have a country of our own. We don't have a homeland. We are a people who live in different parts of the world. So I think we, as the Roma studies, can actually contribute to global studies with the experiences we have and the way we build our identity in a way that is distinct, is different. So there is a lot there to be discussed and done in terms of representation, visibility, empowering stories, and the way in which Roma studies can be connected with other fields and disciplines and global studies more broadly.
I'm sure there is a lot of work to do when it comes to Roma people at all these levels: academic level, social level, political level. From your perspective, what is the most urgent thing one must do in relation to the condition of the Roma people today?
You mean like the non-Roma parties, or like in general? Okay.
From your experience, from your agenda, what is the most pressing thing? What do you want to see done first and foremost?
Okay. So what comes to mind is there are a few things. One is I would like, when it comes to, for example, Roma integration, Roma being part of society and so on, the focus is a lot on what the Roma people can do. But because the systemic discrimination and exclusion has been done by mainstream institutions, I would like to see more and more mainstream institutions that are apologizing for the history of the Roma, for acts, for enabling historically, like for example, slavery or Holocaust. Like for example, Pope did that when he was in Romania. He apologized for this, and it's a symbolic thing, but it's an important thing to be done. So acts of symbolic acts of, for example, apology or welcoming, I think that should happen. including in New York. I would like to see, the mayor of New York, public officials here saying, we don't know much about the Roma communities here, but we are open to learn and understand. I think it also should be, so that's at the symbolic level and at the discourse level. But I think in this case, there is some progress that has been done. What I think is the most urgent and sensitive is the way the funds operate. And because the Roma still face a lot of financial exclusion. There is some progress that has been done on the narrative of like the inclusion of Roma in that sense, but not that much when it comes to flexible funding. And I see this again, there is a disconnect between the top and how it like and the people who need resources. There are not enough resources.
People are amazed by some very superficial aspects of Roma people's wealth, but in fact, let's not forget that the majority of the Roma people live in a very, very even an abject poverty and a state of deprivation. And
definitely, I mean, there are always some people that have some wealth, but certainly overall the Roma people don't have enough resources in general. And also Roma scholars, Roma institutions, Roma centers are not yet fully included when it comes to, somebody told me once that people or institutions give money to other people and institutions that have money already. So there's this like catch-22 of resources being redistributed among those who already have resources. But how do you break that cycle and make sure that the resources get to the people, both the people at the, in different communities, but also centers, institutions, scholars that are needing it. And for example, when you do innovative work, you need resources that are somehow flexible and not come with like rigid rules, and also that give agency and trust the people. So I think there are different aspects of financial exclusion that can be addressed, and the need for flexible funding that includes Roma people and Roma voice. I want to be part of, like conversations when like some philanthropists meet and discuss of how they share their resources, and actually offer them some real life, real experiences of what's like to establish a center and so on, because they might give them some perspective on the disconnect between, good intentions and what is actually needed. But that, again, I think that's urgent, that's important. In general, I think is understanding our history, making space for us to express our voice, and take responsibility as non-Roma people, individuals, institutions, to do the work that it needs to be done, to connect, to understand, to have advisors that are Roma as part of their different projects, so they can understand that. So it's clear.
I mean, a lot of work to do in terms of symbolic gestures, but also awareness and also financing and many other things. I'm afraid we don't have much time left. There are so many things and very interesting things even to be discussed, but I'm afraid we must end our conversation here. I'd like to wish you good luck in your efforts to promote this awareness and this information, and in your research about the Roma people. I'd like to thank our viewers for spending this afternoon with us, like many other times before. Don't go away. Our weekly program is as rich as ever, with many interesting things in history, literature, visual arts, theater. I'd like to thank you once again, Cristiana, for accepting our invitation at the Feraru series. Thank our viewers for their interest and support. Goodbye and stay safe.